you remembering that?
Whichever you prefer.
We ready? Ready? Okay, I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee on Tuesday, April 17 at 7:05 PM in the Aldermanic Chamber. If the clerk would call the roll, please.
Alderman Marianne Malizzi Goya.
Present.
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Here.
Alderman at Large David Tenza.
Here.
Alderman at Large Brandon Michael Laws.
Here.
Alderman Jan Schmidt. Also in attendance, President McCarthy. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Public comment? Do you wish, Ava, come forward? And just if you would just state your name for the record, please? An address, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is a little,
If you want to raise it, you,
I think I should.
okay.
Here we go.
There.
So my name is Arden Kalla. I came a couple months ago to talk with you all about offshore wind. So I just wanted to come and visit again, provide some updates, and hopefully get an update from all of you. So these are the 17 New Hampshire towns or cities that have either passed the resolution or warrant article, and they're working on it. Newfields, Hopkinton, Exeter, Hampton, Henniker, Lee, Loudon, Merrimack, Nottingham, Alstead, Chesterfield, Marlborough, Rindge, and Westmoreland. So I'd like to see Nashua on that list. We should really be a pioneer, in my opinion. I'm really excited about this opportunity to let our governor know how we feel about researching offshore wind. So I just wanted to follow up on that, and then also get an update from each of you and what I can do to help this process along.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Should I sit now?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. Okay, no other public comment? Okay, we have a presentation this evening from our Environment and Energy Committee. As many of you know, it's a newly formed committee in the city, and they have been working very hard on putting together their goals. You've received something from the committee that has their recommendations for 2018. And Madeline, if you would like to do the presentation. And for our television audience, if both of you would like to introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. My name is Mallory Minow, and I'm the Waterways Manager for the City of Nashua, and I'll be presenting today with
Dan Weeks, a resident at 7 Shattuck Street in Nashua and a member of the Environment and Energy Committee.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today and to present to you a little bit about what the Environment and Energy Committee has been up to and some goals and recommendations that we've been working pretty hard on for the last almost year now. So as a little bit of background, the Environment and Energy Committee was created in November 2016, and then we put together the members and we started meeting in about March 2017. So the purpose of the committee is to promote sustainability and livability in Nashua, as well as environmental stewardship and renewable energy, energy conservation and efficiency, especially for the city, with a focus on cost savings for the city. We also promote the reduction of environmental impacts and encourage green initiatives, and these are both for the municipal operations themselves and the community at large. The committee itself is made up of business representatives, community members, as well as city staff. So we currently have 2 business representatives. Doria Brown is a sustainability specialist at Worthing Industries, located here in Nashua, and you just met Dan Weeks, who's Director of Market Development for Revision Energy. We also had Michael Siddell, who was on the committee previously and contributed quite a bit to this work, but is no longer on the committee. For community members, we have Gary Lambert and Sylvie Stewart, and Arden will be joining us soon, so I've included her here. For city staff, for community development, we have Sarah Marchand, the CDD director, Representing Public Works, we have Carrie Converse, who's an environmental engineer. The mayor's appointment is Justin Cates from the Office of Emergency Management, who's also here today. The Board of Aldermen representative is Alderwoman Shoshona Kelly, and then myself, I'm vice chair, and I'm also support staff for the committee. In 2017, some of the highlights of what the community was up to, we organized 2 events. We had Clean Energy 101 seminar or presentation at the library during the summer, and then in the fall, we organized a volunteer cleanup at Sandy Pond, and it was a pretty successful event. We collected quite a bit of litter around the pond. And then we worked on developing the goals and recommendations that will be the focus of our presentation today. When the mayor decided to uphold the goals of the Paris Accord, he tasked our committee with working on developing these goals and recommendations on just what that's going to mean for Nashua. So the exact goals didn't have to be the exact same as what they were in the Paris Accord, so we decided to tailor those more specifically to our community, and then recommendations on just how we are going to achieve that. To inform that, the committee reviewed what we know so far for the city's energy use and emissions. The city in 2000 had a municipal and community greenhouse gas emission inventory done by ICLEI. And then in 2011, the Jordan Institute did a comprehensive energy plan for the city, which was just focused on municipal operations. And we are currently right now working with a consultant to update our municipal emissions inventory. So as you can see from the figure, which is actually from the 2000 report, the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions and therefore energy use by the city is in municipal buildings more so than vehicles or streetlights or wastewater, which was considered separately. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dan to talk about the goals and recommendations that the community came up with.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, members of the committee, for your time and attention. We are very excited to present the fruits of our first several months of work, looking at the work that's been done previously to assess where Nashua is currently as a city and to a limited extent where we are as a larger community, as the second largest city in New Hampshire, and then to look at what we believe is realistic, achievable, but also really forward-looking for the city. And I would emphasize at the beginning, some of you perhaps caught an interview on NPR yesterday with the mayor of Georgetown, Texas, a very conservative community in a very conservative state, which is the first community, to my knowledge, to be 100% renewable energy powered, both as a municipality of about 50,000 and as an entire community, its businesses, its residents. And I just wanted to mention that example to begin this presentation of what we propose to be Nashua's goals, to make the point, as this mayor made, I thought, very effectively on the radio yesterday, that this is by no means a political issue or a partisan issue, that technology has advanced to a point today where both in terms of efficiency and clean energy generation, it is possible to save taxpayers significant money while helping to do the right thing for our environment. And so these goals, were we delivering them a decade ago or even 5 years ago, may not have brought the real opportunity for cost savings, but they do today. And we're happy to provide the evidence as well as examples from other communities here in New Hampshire and places further afield like Georgetown, Texas, that prove the point. So we have 3 broad goals, all of them related, and then 6 interwoven recommendations which flow from these goals. The goals are first to reduce school, municipal building, and infrastructure greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2025. Infrastructure refers to, again, municipal infrastructure as opposed to private or residential infrastructure, but that would be wastewater treatment, for example, which is a major energy consumer. Secondly, to reduce municipal vehicle emissions, also by 25% by the year 2025. And then looking out a little bit further to achieve 100% renewable energy generation for school and municipal system power needs by 2050. These goals are several years out. We had a fair amount of internal debate as a committee, questions around whether 100% is ever attainable, ever reasonable. And for reasons we can get into, we did conclude that it is very reasonable that we could attain this in 2050. I think may be far more time than we need as we look at the trajectory that a number of communities, including New England communities, are setting out. Hanover, New Hampshire, for example, committing to achieve that not just as a municipality, the town, but as an entire community by 2030, as one example. So those are the three broad goals, and they lead into the next slide, our recommendations. So to summarize these, and then we're glad to go into as much detail as you wish. The handout, which I think is shown on the following slides, provides specific steps that we recommend with respect to each of these 6 recommendations. The first is where any home or business should always begin. We've tried to do this in my own home through weatherization, is to reduce your consumption. You don't need to change your quality of life often to realize meaningful efficiencies. And so building in energy efficiency and resiliency was our first goal. And we can go into more detail, but we want to identify in particular those 3 municipal properties which have the combination of highest load, most room for improvement based on outdated systems where we can achieve the highest value in the shortest time. The second, and this is kind of an overarching goal which affects certainly the remaining 5, is to establish better citywide energy benchmarking, tracking, and reporting so that as we progress in all of these areas, we are able to measure our progress, to actually demonstrate progress, to find where we are not making the amount of progress we hope to, and areas where we can improve. The third is to reduce municipal vehicle emissions. And again, we're happy to dive into any of these in more detail, but specifically to, as the city upgrades its fleet, as it needs to add new vehicles, first of all, to assess whether a vehicle is truly necessary, whether a perhaps more efficient vehicle could fulfill the purpose, to begin introducing electric vehicles into the fleet, which I can speak from personal experience, have very good economics. The fourth is to increase renewable energy generation. And here we see a lot of good opportunities. The city and school district in particular have many roofs with ample space to generate solar energy. We see that the economics of solar, for instance, one is able to generate electricity in the region of 3, 4, 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is less than half or maybe a quarter of what current and future projected electricity rates are. So very substantial savings opportunities there. We can speak more about. The fifth is to promote alternative modes of transportation. The city, many of you here have been leaders for years now on rail, for example, which is not something we intend to spend a lot of time leading because there is good leadership already, including from the mayor here and from members of the Board of Aldermen, but we certainly want to reinforce the value of that, but also talk about bicycle transportation, making it a more bike-friendly city, for example, and providing public bike at no cost to taxpayers. And finally, at the policy level, optimizing city policies to remove unnecessary barriers and create strong incentives for energy efficiency, resiliency, and clean energy, sustainable development. So that's the overview. Do you want to dive in some more detail? And we should say that as we go along, please feel free to ask questions or share your thoughts.
Yeah. So to go into the specific recommendations under those 6 categories, for building energy efficiency, we're recommending to do energy audits on 3 municipal buildings and implement the energy efficiency upgrades and retrofits that would be recommended by those audits. The school system is already moving forward, is our understanding, with energy performance contracting on the 2 high schools. And we think that's very interesting. And then we think we should monitor both of those approaches and see which way would be a good way forward for the city and schools.
Madeline, just
Yeah.
one question. For the municipal buildings, are there 3 buildings that the committee has kind of put on a list, or are there 4 or 5 on a short list?
There are some that were identified in the 2011 energy plan, and we're waiting on the emissions update to see some of those buildings had some upgrades done already and
Okay.
some haven't. And so we're really waiting to see the emissions update, which we should have soon,
Okay.
to get a better sense of that.
Okay.
But I've also talked with, facilities folks, and they have a short list of buildings that they think it would make a lot of sense to look into as
Okay.
well.
Great, thank you.
And then we think we should either expand energy performance contracting citywide or continue self-managed approach, which would be a building-by-building targeted approach. And then we think we should also look at potentially implementing microgrids with storage in major municipal and school switchgear upgrades or any new facility construction. And that falls a little more under the resiliency part. As far as citywide energy tracking and reporting, the committee felt strongly that this would be best achieved by having a citywide energy manager position to be a champion and facilitate the energy projects. Right now, the school system has a part-time energy manager, and the city side does not have someone who serves that role. The financial department at times tracks energy use, but that has been inconsistent, and it's not in a way that, it's really the focus of someone's job. And tracking the energy use is one part, and then we really need someone to be able to follow through on recommending projects and implementing those projects.
And I would just say, and Alderman McCarthy, I know remembers this also, the city person, when they were full-time, when they were looking at what they were saving in energy, it was more than what they were paying that person.
Yes, that is very typical in industry and in municipalities, that when you have a full-time energy manager, the cost savings that they're able to achieve by paying attention and implementing energy efficiency projects more than funds their position. To reduce municipal vehicle emissions, we think we should achieve at least a 10% improvement in net fuel efficiency across the municipal vehicle fleet by 2020. And I think that that can be achieved as we replace vehicles. We really need to look at maximizing fuel efficiency as well as sizing vehicles appropriately for the use. So establishing criteria for evaluating vehicle necessity and suitability for the municipal fleet, I think, would be important, and the committee felt was important. And we would recommend introducing at least 2 zero-emission vehicles and associated infrastructure by 2020.
Oh, excuse me, Alderman McCarthy.
Where do you think we have vehicles that are not appropriately sized, if any place?
I haven't done a comprehensive analysis. I've looked at it a little bit. There are some instances where a small SUV, I think, could be replaced by a small sedan. But I would need to know more about the detailed, so that's looking at a spreadsheet. I would need to understand more about who uses that vehicle and the purpose before I would say, for sure, that one, could be replaced in a certain way.
The majority of our fuel consumption, at least, is in the public works dump trucks, the Packers, and things like fire engines, which I
Fire and
suspect
police.
we're not going to budge much on.
Absolutely.
size.
Fire and police have the vast majority of municipal vehicles, and they need specialized equipment for public safety, and we definitely understand that. But, for example, New York City is investing in some electric police cruisers or hybrid electric. So there's some markets being developed even for those specialized vehicles.
Worth noting the recent upgrade of some city buses to clean gas burning is definitely an improvement in terms of emissions.
Under the category of increasing renewable energy generation, we think that there should be a comprehensive approach to looking at developing solar on municipal buildings or properties, and we think that that would be the good way to achieve that would be to issue a citywide RFP to look at solar. So issue an RFP and have any qualified solar developers propose what they would suggest would be economically viable solar projects for the city. And we would have a goal of 1 megawatt of solar generation capacity by 2020. We also recommend using renewable electricity third-party supply if cost competitive. The city uses third-party electricity supply, and when you look at different providers, some of them offer a mix of renewables or 100% renewables. And sometimes those are cost competitive with traditional electricity sources. So we think that that should be considered whenever third-party electricity supply contracts are entered into.
I can just note there, if the city decided that next year we wanted to be 100% clean energy powered, we could simply enroll in a new energy supply contract, which through the purchase of RECs, renewable energy credits, would be procuring its power from, for instance, Midwestern Wind. When at our home, our solar isn't meeting our load at a given point in time, we're drawing kilowatt hours through Eversource from a third-party supplier that is wind-powered. We pay a premium of about half a penny per kilowatt hour. The options are increasingly at or sometimes below fossil fuel supply. So that is an option which, at a minimum, we think the city should do when it will not add cost. In some cases, it can save cost, and it's a way to very rapidly and easily progress toward that goal of 100% clean energy generation.
Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, two questions. One's an easy one. A megawatt of solar, what does that translate into in square feet of panels?
So a megawatt is roughly 5 acres. If
Okay.
you think of a ground-mounted installation. And one of the sites that we are beginning to explore is the landfill, which is more than that. The two high schools' preliminary analysis suggests that each of them could host approximately 1 megawatt AC, or even a little bit more. So we think 1 megawatt is a pretty modest goal. We'd like to see that installed and commissioned by 2020, which is when the tax credits for solar begin to sunset. We think the city and school district may conclude that they want to be much more ambitious. Preliminary analysis suggests that there would be meaningful 7-figure savings for any project at this scale. And if the roofs are suitable or land is made available for that purpose, the savings would be substantial.
Yeah, I actually like that, and I'd actually like to see us look particularly at putting solar on top of parking structures and parking lots, since it basically allows you to double use that real estate. It makes it more attractive for cars because they're not covered. In terms of the renewable third-party energy, I have a little bit of a concern with the holistic effect that has if the city goes out to a renewable third party, in that we're a pretty big consumer. So we can't make a change without actually impacting the regional market to some extent. And so if the regional providers of fossil generated fuels aren't making their money from Nashua, they're going to have to make it somewhere else. So I worry a little that we'll either drive up the rate nearby, or that in the regulatory process, more of that company's costs will be attributed to stranded costs that's in the distribution side rather than the supply part of the cost. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
I'll make one comment. Since Eversource has completed divestiture, generation assets and distribution transmission are now much more decoupled. So if a fossil fuel generator had trouble finding markets for their electricity, that wouldn't, like it used to be if Eversource owned the coal plant in Bow, then be a lost revenue and then be passed on to ratepayers. That was the whole goal of divestiture, was to separate the risk of the generation assets from the ratepayers' exposure.
And I would just add, President McCarthy, thank you for the question. We see many of the major power suppliers diversifying their portfolios. Some of the major fossil fuel companies, including the majors, the largest corporations on earth, are making substantial investments in clean technologies, wind and solar in particular. And what a municipality change like this does is send a price signal to them that they will make more money in the future by making capital investments in the area of renewable energy generation. And we are already seeing price parity, or in fact, in windy portions of the country and offshore, as well as places with high solar insolation, we see the cost per kilowatt hour to generate is lower for renewables than it is for fossil fuels. And as more municipalities lead in this way, those prices only come down further. So we do see, and one final related point, as of, I think, 2016, there are more jobs in the domestic solar industry, about 250,000, than in all fossil fuel industries combined. So while there is a transition cost, no doubt about it, the long-term economic projections are very positive as cities like Nashua help to lead this transition.
Another way to increase renewable energy generation community-wide is to launch a Nashua Solarize Plus campaign, which the committee has already undertaken. We put out an RFP for that, and we're expecting proposals later this week. And so this is the committee's sort of big community-wide initiative for this year. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that, hopefully, as we roll out the campaign in mid to late May. And then the committee also recommended determining the feasibility of outfall micro hydro turbines. For example, the city of Dover has a small turbine in its wastewater treatment plant outfall. In any pipe that you have continuously flowing clean water, you can have a little hydropower turbine. That's something that we might want to consider looking into. To promote alternative modes of transportation, as Dan mentioned, the committee supports passenger rail. But we also think it's important to really look at and encourage bicycle and pedestrian transportation. So we think the city should develop a bicycle and pedestrian master plan by 2019 and implement a bike share rental program this year. And then our final category was to optimize city policies to incentivize energy efficiency, resiliency, and sustainable development. And the committee as a whole could not agree on specific ways to implement that. So that's a little bit of a big picture item, but we still thought was important. So we just, yes.
Can you just, what were some of the things you discussed, and what are the reasons why you couldn't decide on them?
So, for example, from my recollection, one of the things was, so community-wide, you could give a discount on building permits if you have Energy Star appliances, for example. If you're going to replace your water heater with an Energy Star water heater, the building permit you have to get for that could be at a discounted cost. That would potentially be a little bit of lost revenue for the city. There was a little bit of debate about the effect of that incentive versus the cost to the city. And so in part, I think that's why the committee didn't come to a complete agreement. Other than that, do you remember other specifics that we
The
discussed?
city has done a fairly good job in some areas. There is a property tax exemption for the additional value that a solar installation adds to a home's valuation. Other communities in New Hampshire, Lebanon and Hanover, for instance, are talking about municipal aggregation, where the city tries to incent community solar initiatives, not simply offsetting municipal load, but enabling community members to benefit. So there are, whether it's providing favorable lease terms to public land that may be available for such a purpose. Nashua land is certainly at a premium, so I'm not proposing this. I don't know that it's feasible here. But these kinds of policies we think are positive. And we did briefly touch on the potential for at least the committee, but also official leaders in the city, such as yourselves, to be speaking on issues, policy issues related to these recommendations in Concord. There's a handful of bills currently before the House and Senate that would, one particular example, Senate Bill 446, would enable the development of solar projects larger than 1 megawatt, which is an artificial cap. The governor has supported removing that cap entirely, as you do just south of here in Massachusetts and a lot of other states. So we think there's some reason for the committee and other leaders in the city to speak out on those kinds of policies, which would directly impact our ability to achieve these goals.
Another thing is looking at zoning and planning regulations as they affect renewable energy siting. Our zoning and planning are mostly silent on solar, which means that they are mostly allowed, but it would be good to have a comprehensive review and have intentional regulation that would encourage and guide such installations if that's what the city wants to see. For example, I know in other municipalities there's been controversial issues around solar as to debate on what counts as impervious cover, because the panel itself, in Concord, there was just a proposal for a large solar farm that failed at the zoning board because they counted the entire area of the panel as impervious cover, even though the runoff from that panel goes underneath to uncovered ground and can soak up there. So we haven't looked comprehensively at, we haven't had a proposal for a major solar farm, as far as I know, so that hasn't come up. But our zoning and planning regulations are mostly silent. So if that came up, the zoning board or planning board may struggle to decide, how do you treat a solar farm? How do you analyze, how does it fit into our regulations or not? So we've talked about a lot of different recommendations. If we have to prioritize and really put emphasis, we think that building energy efficiency should be prioritized, as well as the energy manager position, working on municipal vehicles, the city solar RFP, the Solarize Plus campaign, which we've already started, and the bicycle pedestrian master plan and bike share. So now that we've told you what our goals and recommendations are, we would love to have your support. We would like to see the city adopt these as the city's goals and recommendations on how to achieve those goals. As the board reviews all the many, many things that comes before you, we would love to have you keep these in mind as you review policies and expenditures, and support the implementation of these recommendations. So if requests come before you that are specifically to implement these, we hope that we will be able to have your support. And with that, you can contact us. The committee has an email address, and we meet every third Thursday at 6 p.m. in room 208. So we have a meeting this Thursday evening, and anyone from the public or the board is always welcome to join us.
Thank you. Any questions? Alderman Tenza.
I have a question. I apologize. I probably should have asked during your presentation, but you had talked about cost to audit and retrofit some of these older buildings like City Hall here.
Yep.
The first question is obviously the city's not going to get a tax credit for the work that they do. Are there federal grants, federal funds available for municipal buildings in order to do that? And would it be cost efficient? Would the city essentially save as much money as they're putting into retrofitting the buildings?
I'm not aware of any grants at the moment. I am always on the lookout for those types of opportunities. Usually, yes, and that's what the audit tells you. So the audit will tell you which improvements will be cost effective and what the return on investment is for those improvements. So for example, I just had an audit done at my home, and they give you many options. So you could do, option A, that will cost you this much, and it's a 1-year return on investment. And then you can go up and up and up, do better and better improvements, but maybe a longer return on investment. And so once we had some of these audits done, we could say, all right, how much improvement do we want to do? How much are we willing to invest? What's the return on investment we're looking for? And that would inform making those investments that will give us a very short return on investment. For example, the LED street lights, I know, had quite a short return on investment. And once we had that information, it just seemed to make sense to make that investment.
And I can just add, while there aren't limited federal grant monies available at present for these kinds of initiatives through RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which the House, under House Bill 559, has voted to support to sustain funding for energy efficiency in New Hampshire. That delivered through the utilities, there are rebates available. Those can be quite substantial, and those help to drive down payback on a typical LED lighting project in the 3, 4, 5-year range. Retrofits that will last without maintenance required for 20, 25, 30 years. So in cases like that, you can see an overnight reduction in load on the order of 20 to 30% in a facility running older lighting. After 3 years, it's paid itself off, and then operational savings can be 5 figures or 6 figures a year, depending on how large the facility is. In projects like renewable energy generation, there are innovative financing mechanisms available where there's no cost, no capital expenditure to the city or school district. A private investor partner owns the asset, sells power at below market rates, and then the city or school district has the option to buy the array from that private partner at a substantial discount to maximize their savings, but there is no exposure in that sense. You begin saving from day one. This is the model that the National Soup Kitchen is using.
May I have a
Yes,
follow-up?
Alderman Tenza, could I just ask you to turn your mic also towards you, please?
Sure.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you. A follow-up, and then Alderman McCarthy.
Thank you. And it's not really a follow-up, it's unrelated, but so the city has 2 hydroelectric dams as well. Is there more opportunity for the city to generate more renewable energy from those dams or utilize them better? Have you looked at that portion of it?
I'm the staff member who manages our hydroelectric assets, so I can tell you probably more than you want to know about our hydropower projects. So we have Jackson Mills, which is 1 megawatt, and we acquired Mine Falls last spring, which is a 3 megawatt facility. And the bill, Senate Bill 446, which would allow facilities greater than 1 megawatt in capacity to be net metered, could change how we use the power generated at Mine Falls in the future. Right now, we are under contract to sell the power generated at Mine Falls to a utility. And that's what we do, and it generates revenue for the city. But the city itself does not use that electricity.
At a low price per kilowatt hour.
What?
Do you know roughly what we sell that power for?
5.2 cents, and then we also sell the RECs, and we get capacity payments. So there's different.
Well below what the city pays for electricity.
Exactly.
If we
So
were
if we
offsetting
could-
our demand.
Just offset our demand, that would be great. There's also, however, Jackson Mills is eligible to net meter or group net meter, but the city has chosen to not do that because up until now, someone who group net meters with a host, such as Jackson Mills, had to go off of third-party supply and become a default utility customer. And so that would have mean an increase in costs for the accounts that we wanted to group net meter with Jackson. And even though we would pay that money to Eversource and get that money back as revenue at the hydroelectric plant, because of the way that finances work in the city, any increased expenditure was seen as a problem, even though it meant increased revenue for the hydroelectric project. So there's a Senate Bill 321, which is also going to the House and seems to be on track, which would get rid of that requirement. And so if the city can stay on its third-party supplier contracts and group net meter with Jackson Mills, which is what we're hoping we'll be able to do if Senate Bill 321 goes through, then the city would now be virtually using the electricity generated at Jackson Mills for ourselves. As far as increasing generation, I think we're doing pretty well and using the resources as well as we can. They are both run-of-river hydropower projects, so they're very dependent on what the river flows are. These last 4 months, we've been working at full capacity, full-time. There have been great river flows, but if there's ever a drought, we can be not generating as much. But we are looking in the future at replacing the turbine at Jackson Mills. And we're doing a feasibility study on that right now, and we're certainly going to look at any increase in generation or capacity that we could achieve there.
May I
Alderman
just
McCarthy. Oh.
add that if any of you has spare bandwidth to speak to legislators, Senate Bill 321 would nearly double the value of those few million kilowatt hours of annual generation because you can then net meter it. You can offset the full value that we pay the utility on our many other city accounts when we purchase electricity, as opposed to being paid a little more than half what we pay on those other meters. So that's an important piece of legislation in terms of the city's value from its existing clean power generation.
And I've been going to the legislature and speaking to how that would affect our hydropower assets for the city.
Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, first I want to make a comment on the building audits and the improvements. We've actually been doing that in school systems through Fairgrounds, Ledge, Broad Street, Charlotte, and Sunset Heights. And in all of those cases, there were some fairly simple add-ons we did, like spraying around the foundation on the bottom that removed, if you ever look at the infrared photos of those buildings, the amount of heat loss in places you wouldn't expect is phenomenal. It's just, the foundation glows red before you do anything to it. And it has actually, I mean, we have tracked the payback on that, and it has been very rapid. Those are now probably the 5 lowest energy cost schools in the district. And if you go back and look, basically in the order we've done them is the order that they're efficient at this point. So as we go through that, those things pay back very quickly. A question occurred to me when you were talking about the 2 hydro dams. So presumably the flow is the same through Mine Falls and Jackson Falls. In fact, Jackson Falls probably gets a little more water a year because it's downstream.
Yep.
Is the difference in generating capacity just because the head is different?
It's all about the head, yep. So we
Okay.
get the same amount of water. The capacity to generate hydropower is a function of discharge and head, and there's a very big drop at Mine Falls. And so there, the capacity is 3 megawatts, and at Jackson, there's a much smaller drop in elevation, so the capacity is 1 megawatt.
Other questions? Comments? You talked about the bike program, and have you got something, are you looking at rolling something out? Are you working with?
The committee is not directly, but I've heard that there are different city staff looking at that. So
Okay.
I'm not sure the exact status of that, so I don't want to speak to that, but I know that economic development and community development and public works are looking into that possibility of a bike share, bike rental program.
Okay. Great.
May I add one final note?
Please.
Thank you, Alderwoman. The program coming right up, as Madeline mentioned, is this Solarize Plus initiative. As someone who also represents the industry, I've been entirely recused from that process. But I did just want to alert you that the committee plans to recommend a provider both for residential solar and small commercial or nonprofit, and for energy efficiency. The plus in Solarize Plus acknowledges the importance of beginning with efficiency, so we've integrated the two using a model that was pursued successfully in the Seacoast last year. And I simply want to alert you as leaders in the community, this is something that doesn't pertain to the city's electric bills, but enables community members to make these kinds of upgrades, whether it's weatherization, efficiency, solar, et cetera, at bulk pricing discounts. The city effectively contracts with a private provider or a few providers. They agree to substantially lower their prices because they get the benefit of in a sense, city-sanctioned bulk pricing with more people participating in a given community over a specified period of time, usually 3 or 4 months. And so it is the success of these initiatives hinges on local community leadership. And so I want to just be sure that that's on your radar. And as that gets announced in the coming several weeks, it would be wonderful to have city leaders participating in whatever way is appropriate for you.
And did I hear you correctly? The RFP has gone out or is going out?
It has gone out. Proposals are due tomorrow.
Okay.
And so we will be reviewing those and selecting vendors for both solar installers and energy efficiency folks that do audits, weatherization, energy efficiency improvements soon. And so once we partner with them and coordinate, we plan on launching the campaign about mid to late May.
Okay. And that's good for people to hear now. So
Yep,
they
and that'll
can
be open
kind of look
for
it.
residents, small business, commercial, nonprofits. So pretty much anyone located in Nashua will be eligible for the program. They can get in touch with us soon. We have a website on off of the Livable Nashua dashboard.
Okay. And so I would think then the program's running over the summer, basically?
Yep, so we'll start mid to late May and then have the campaign last the duration of the summer, probably end signups in early September. And then the actual installation and improvements will occur in the fall, because the more people sign up during the sign-up period of the summer, the better the discounts get. So because it's bulk pricing, there will be some tiers, and so depending on how many kilowatts of new solar contracts there are, or how many different energy efficiency projects there are, the discounts get better.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from, yes, Alderman Laws?
I'm almost embarrassed to even bring this up. But, I mean, I haven't been on Twitter in the last half hour, so I don't know what new policy decisions the president's made. But the trade war with China that he's trying to start and their 20% tariff on solar panels, how does that affect
30%.
30%? Yeah. I feel like that's something, it's an elephant in the room. What's the future there? How does that affect the pricing, the affordability? I mean, are the panels mostly made in China, or are they made stateside these days, or?
I think it depends on the installer, and that's something some folks have advised me to consider when we look at proposals for the Solarize campaign, that some installers primarily use American-made panels and some use Chinese-made panels. I'm not down in the technical details of the solar industry. I think Dan might be more able to speak to that.
Practically and very briefly, what this means at present is that a payback period that was usually in the 6-7 years for a residential project is 7 or 8 years. The system is still warranted for 25 years and built to last for 40 years. So the value proposition is still very strong because the sun keeps shining, but it's not as good as it was some months ago. That said, the technology continues to improve. The efficiency of panels improves each year. So within a year or two, we will have made up for that 30% tariff. The vast majority of solar panels installed in this country are imported from abroad, even though they're often designed here, and the rest of the value chain is all domestic. The 250,000 jobs I mentioned, only about 1,000 of them are manufacturing, but those are benefit from the fact that we have low-cost, high-efficiency modules made in Singapore, Korea, China, places like that.
Please.
As an aside, I think you guys are doing really important work, and I appreciate it.
Great, thank you so
thank you.
much.
Alderman Tenza?
You talked a little bit about community aggregation, which I think is an important, very important concept. Will this initiative, how will this initiative that's going to be rolled out in May affect that? I mean, will there be some type of coordinated effort if a neighborhood wants to try to come together and
There is not a specific community solar part of this initiative. We're mainly targeting property owners that own their property. I have been approached by folks, for example, who live in condos and their condo association does not want to see solar panels on their buildings, and that is an issue, and those are some folks that would really benefit from community solar. And so I think maybe that would be a next step after we do the Solarize Plus campaign, which is an obvious first step for folks that own their buildings. It's a great opportunity for them. And then maybe we would look at community solar project for folks that either are renters or live in a condo association that's not friendly to solar, or just for whatever reason, siding or trees or the orientation of their home are not favorable to solar themselves.
There are a few state policy changes needed to make that really viable in the way it is just south of the border, but it's coming.
Other comments, questions, thoughts? Thank you. Look
Thank you very
forward to
much.
hearing from you. Okay. It's not time for public comment right now, but thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Communication, we have none. Unfinished business, we have none. New business, we have none. Before we go to the new business ordinance, I know Ms. Kalis wanted to make a comment. Do you mind if, because I think we might be here a while, and I don't think you want to stay here.
My husband appreciates that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So there are a couple of things I just wanted to say about the Environment and Energy Committee's work. I really appreciate, as a Nashua taxpayer, the attention that you're putting into your questions regarding how much are the cost savings and so on and so forth in doing renewables and energy efficiency projects. I think that's a really important question. What I do want to call out is that when I go to the gas pump, and I pay for gas, the cost of that pollution on my health isn't calculated for at the pump. So I do think that there's additional cost savings in cleaning up our air in Nashua and cleaning up the pollution that we're not accounting for when we consider some of these projects. And I think that that's really important. I also think it's really important to consider the impacts that our clean air would have in just getting our climate to start acting friendly again. I was talking to a farmer in Hudson just on Sunday, and he is miserable at the economic impact that he's feeling because he can't start selling his goods because we've had nor'easters in April, which is not supposed to be happening. So I just wanted to draw out that viewpoint that there's more cost savings than just what we're seeing on paper, that the reduction in emissions is going to save in a lot of other ways. So. And then the other thing I just wanted to discuss as well, and what I talked about earlier, is just an update on the offshore wind study and where we're at and what I can do to help move that forward for Nashua. So,
Okay, and as I told you earlier, I had asked that a resolution be put together, and at this point, I haven't seen anything, but as soon as I know something's ready, I will contact you, so you'll know it'll be on the agenda somewhere if you would like to come and speak to it.
okay, very good. So
Okay.
at this point, just sit tight. There's nothing else I can do.
No.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's all
yeah.
I wanted to hear.
Okay.
Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
and thank you for joining our committee, the
Oh,
E&E
yeah.
Committee.
I'm looking forward to it. So officially, I think I come before the Board of Aldermen on May 7th, but I'm really looking forward to it.
That's
So,
great. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thanks. And Madeline, thank you. So the new business ordinance for this evening is 01801, and it's an amendment to the Explosive Materials Code. Do I have a motion? Alderman Tenza?
I'd like to make a motion for final passage of, excuse me, R 18010.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit of history on this, and I don't know how much of this you've all had a chance to read or if there are questions you have about it. Several years ago, there was some major development around Exit 1. And as a result of that development, there was property damage from the blasting. And so community members contacted Director Marchant and myself, and Director Marchant and some other people from the Community Development Office worked together in looking at our explosive materials code and looking at what other people in the state are doing. The development of the outlet mall in Merrimack resulted in similar property damage, and so Merrimack ended up updating their explosive blasting codes. And so that was one of the points of reference for this code and putting it together. And Director Marchant and several people from her office, as well as the fire marshal, were involved in putting this together. As you've looked through it, you see that the responsibility for monitoring this and what's being done really falls with the fire marshal's office. So I just wanted to give people an opportunity this evening to make any comments. If there are questions you have, because my intention is at our next meeting to invite the fire marshal so we can have direct conversation with him. But I didn't know if there were initial questions you had or thoughts. Alderman Tenza?
My question is just based on the history. What kind of property damage? Was it structural damage? Was it damage from the actual
Structural
blast?
damage, yeah.
Because of the shifts underneath the ground, or?
Yeah, the tremors from the property were, I'm talking about the Flatley property. The tremors from there were felt at Bicentennial Elementary. I actually felt them one day at my house. I happened to be home. And people who lived up in that area and kind of from the Flatley property, Shakespeare, all the way down to East Dunstable, people had things fall off of walls and break. There were there was structural damage, cracks in ceilings and those sorts of things. But the other thing that happened was people came in and took pre-blasting videos, and then no one was sure who had the videos or where the videos went to, and we had nothing in our codes to really hold them accountable. So when people had damage and said, well, you took a pre-blasting video, there was nothing there. So there were other issues besides the structural damage that is of concern, and then whether or not the blasting was more than what was needed, and just monitoring all of that. And the discussions got way more technical than I was able to follow. But there were some other things in terms of the fire marshal and monitoring of those blastings that it was determined would be appropriate. Yeah, Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, it's sort of a general question in that the legislation appears to be an entirely new section.
Right.
I'm wondering how different that is from current practice and what additional burden we're putting on people who are doing the development.
I'm going to tell you what I was told. Yes, it is. It's very different from current practice. If they're doing blasting, they may have to pay for our fire marshal to be there, or if we don't have, the other issue is that my understanding is that for some of the blasting, we really don't have the expertise in the city, and so someone from the state fire marshal's office would need to come down and take care of it. And although I recognize that it's an impact on developers, I can say on that property, additional building that's been done, there has been a minimal amount of blasting, so there hasn't been any problem. But the amount of concerns and property damage that happened as a result of that first round of blasting, and the lack of goodwill that was generated,
Yeah,
I think warrants this.
I don't see anything terribly burdensome in there, but.
Yeah.
And I had one specific comment that it says the blasting has to be done between 8 and 5 or 9 and 5. I would just point out that, for example, when the third building on the Spitbrook Road site was built, the blasting was actually done about 5:15 or 5:30, and the reason for that is there were 2,000 people on the site from 9 to 5, so they would set charges until 5 o'clock and then give
Right.
people some time to clear out and then do the blasting. And that may actually be a very reasonable way to do that, particularly if you're, on an occupied site, we may want to give them the flexibility to work around the
Right.
hours that it's heavily occupied.
And I think we can add that there is that flexibility if the site's occupied. So are there any other questions, comments, Alderman Tenza?
So I have a question. I don't think it's necessarily you need to answer it, but maybe when the fire marshal comes or Director Marchant, if she comes to talk on this as well. I'm curious as to how these regulations, I understand they'll put some more procedures in place for developers to follow, but how, if at all, will they help to alleviate what happened previously with property damage?
And I will tell you what was discussed in this meeting. More involvement in the fire marshal's office is just going to tighten what's going on there and monitor the blasting. But this whole piece about the videotapes, I mean, that was huge. And people felt very strongly that there was a need to make sure if someone's coming in and making those videotapes, we need to know who's responsible for them. Because the developer thinks the company he's hired has them, and they say, oh no, we gave them to the developer, and they are lost somewhere in translation in between. So just really nailing those things down so they're very clearly stated, and it's not just an agreement between the developer and the person doing the videotaping, but it's written, this is what has to be done. So that was an attempt to tighten that. Yeah.
Would it be possible for us to see a side-by-side with the current law and the proposed?
It's,
I don't know that there is any written down current law. We have practice, which is why this is a new.
it's in the fire, it's just in fire code, but I can ask them to bring what we have.
That'd be good, thank you.
Okay, so I will ask the fire marshal to be here next week. If you have additional thoughts or questions, if you could get them to me, even by next Wednesday or Thursday, and then I'll send those to the fire marshal, all in one list. That would be helpful. Public, yeah, Alderman Jettie.
So the proposed ordinance, is it just the fire marshal who was instrumental in overseeing the writing of this thing?
No, as I stated, it was a group of people, the fire marshal and several people from Director Marchand's office, Director Marchand and a couple other people,
So,
as well as some other people from the fire department. They were on the initial emails putting this together.
so would it not be appropriate for those other, Director Marchand or those other people that were involved to be here as well to?
I am going to ask Director Marchand. She and I talked about this earlier, and she suggested the fire marshal be here. And so that was where I'm going with that. I anticipate she will be here also at our meeting in 2 weeks, and I can make that request of her. But this is really going to be operating out of the fire marshal's office, out of his shop. I will see what her availability is. I actually think she may be here, yes.
I'm just looking through it some more, and the section on insurance requirements may need to be looked at again, because I think there's some stuff in here that was pulled in from somewhere else that doesn't belong in this
Okay.
ordinance. Things like motor vehicle liability, $1 million combined single limit. I'm not sure why we have that requirement on blasting insurance. And workers' comp.
So I will ask them to check and see if it's supposed to be here. If not, or if so, why?
This actually looks like it was taken in from requirements that may have existed in purchasing or somewhere for insurance for the city.
Oh, maybe. I know they looked at things at the state. I know they looked at stuff from Merrimack. They looked at several different examples from different places to put this together. Any other thoughts, questions? Alderman Tenza?
Madam Chair, just one more thought that I had is that it may be, if the chair thinks it's appropriate, may be helpful to invite some developers as well, maybe someone from the Flatley Company. Not to talk about the past, but maybe how these regulations would affect them in the future.
Alderman
Certainly.
McCarthy, your thoughts on that?
I
Certainly,
think that's probably a good idea. I
Have
mean,
it
we ought to
invited.
at least understand, you know, from what I see, mostly this requires that you submit information you should have anyway, but if somebody comes in and says, hey, that's
Okay.
gonna cost me $500,000 to do, I'd like to know that.
Okay, so other than Flatley, who do you think we should invite?
What you might do is contact somebody in the area who does blasting.
Okay, I'll ask the fire marshal to do that. Do we, well, they'll know who does blasting. I know that whoever did the original blasting at Flatley, they didn't use them the second time around because of their concerns with them. And I will, any other thoughts? Any other developers you can think of? Anyone? Okay.
You might just ask the fire marshal's office who has done substantial blasting in the last decade. I don't think there are that many of them.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of,
The development down on Mid Dunstable Road, Sky Country or whatever it is, may have had substantial blasting.
okay.
And I know that a good deal of it was done when Spitbrook was built, but I don't know who you'd talk to about that.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, he's used a couple of different people. Okay. So I will ask Adam for that information. Public comment, none. Remarks by Alderman?
We've had a motion for recommendation
Oh,
of final
yes.
passage. Should we, they should be tabled.
Yeah, we
shouldn't
need
it?
a motion
So
to
we should
table.
vote this down first?
Yeah, we can just table.
Okay.
Do you have a motion?
Your name's already in here.
make a motion to
Table.
table R or O 18010 till the next meeting of the public, of the PEDC.
Mm-hmm. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that motion is tabled. Remarks? There's no need for a non-public session. Do I have a motion?
Move to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we are adjourned at 8:13.